So this video is going to go over all the games I had in a Nimzo-Larsen tournament, which starts with the move b3, and we'll go through the games one by one. Some of them I'll comment, and some of them I'll just show the moves. I'm going to show this game because it had a lot of interesting twists. I'll kind of go straight to the pivotal moments. Okay, right here is before the first capture, and the position's about equal, with white only having like plus 0.12 or equal. A bunch of different lines are pretty equal. First capture happens here, so now I have the bishop pair, nothing crazy. The game goes on. Here I obviously started worrying about the attack on the h-pawn, so I had to do something about it. I didn't really want to play h3 that much, just because I've been in so many situations where people start pushing the pawns on the king side, and my pieces are pretty largely over here, and I feel like he has an easier time getting an attack. So even though it was maybe a wrong decision, it's actually the second best move, so it's basically fine. I pushed g3 instead. We get h5, and now I'm obviously very worried about him pushing h4. So I did a move which in hindsight wasn't the best. Best move apparently is h3, which makes more sense now because obviously the fact is you push forward here, I have this, and you know, black's basically got nothing here, but that is not what I did. I went ahead and just pushed h4, which wasn't the best. Something I was worried about here though, which turns out not to be a huge problem, is I just got in this situation and the engine says this is completely fine, and I think I see how. All I need to do is bring the queen over, make sure his queen is forced to move somewhere back, and then theoretically I'm getting a lot closer to doing a queen trade, and if that happens, everything's fine. White is up 0.8 maybe here. So the sacrifice didn't work. He got 3 pawns for bishop, but at the end of the day, I'll be totally okay. I was worried about that though. Thankfully that didn't happen, so I moved my king up to prevent that basically, since he castled. Right now it does say black has a small advantage. The game goes on. At this point I said, there's basically a chess rule where it says when someone's attacking in the center and these pawns are moving forward, you should attack on the sides, basically. Just not really to distract them, but just like a general chess strategy. Here I was a little bit worried because I was like, all right, the pawns are coming, and if I take here, which is what I did, he's going to push h4. I can't really take here, obviously, because this is not so good for me. So what I ended up doing was taking this first, which obviously is the best move. Get up a full piece. It's a gambit he does that doesn't really work. He is getting a lot of pieces. I move over here. There's basically, you gotta be really careful about taking this pawn, because if you're not careful, what's gonna happen is you're gonna get destroyed on here. So let me just do an example. I take the pawn here, he pushes here. Now my bishop is under attack, I gotta get out of the way. If I move back to here, he's gonna move both of his rooks over, and this just seemed not good for me. It's not hugely winning for black, but it's enough that I wanted to avoid it. So I move the rook over first. He does the excellent check, for the position at least. Basically taking the pawn's very bad, so I'm still winning here, thankfully, but check first, I takes. Now you can't take the pawn here, because if you take the pawn here, you're gonna lose your bishop. Obviously, wherever you move, you're gonna lose your bishop on the next turn. So instead of taking there, I found apparently what was the best move, which I just looked at the options and I was like, if I'm not careful, he's gonna move his pieces over. I can't take this right now. If I start with a move that, you know, blocks or something, okay, this is obviously not gonna work. I'm gonna regret doing that. So I only have so many options, and bishop g4 seemed to be the way to go, even though it actually eventually allows him to take this pawn back. This rook is not super dangerous as long as I get my queen up like this so that my other rook can take it when he promotes. Game goes on. I now have a pretty big threat. I'm going to win another piece, or at least I'm going to, you know, equalize, so it takes. So let's just say he makes some random move. Takes, and now I'm up a full piece based on my advantage, and I can start making some moves basically, and obviously I'm going to win the queening pawn. Everything is totally fine. So he moves the knight out of the way, and basically maybe you get in some situations where if I try to move pawns too aggressively, he can start maybe attacking them, start harassing them. So here's a really fun move. It's kind of a clearing sacrifice. What I really wanted to do is I really want to attack this bishop, because if this bishop moves out of the way, it's just going to make things worse for him, and then I can attack this pawn. But I obviously don't want to put my knight here, so when he takes, I don't take back with my knight here. I put my knight over here, and now his bishop is going to have to move. If it doesn't, here's what's going to happen. Let's just say he makes some random move. Let's just say he takes another pawn. Basically what happens here is takes, and now his queen's in a lot of trouble because wherever he goes, it's pretty dicey. The only way to hold on is you have to move back here, but after takes, we're totally fine. I'm up a full bishop. It's my turn. I'm going to take this pawn. This pawn's nebulous. Everything's fine, and the game goes on. So he does, instead, a very interesting move. He moves his knight over here, which this is unfortunately just a bad move because I take here, the knight's defended, now there's triple, quadruple open discovered checks, and I make this important move here, moving your king over to the corner, basically to stop the shenanigans. There's basically a very interesting line where if I don't play this move, it looks dicey, I'm still winning, but let's just say I take here first. Then I take here. Then I take here. Then he takes. Then I take. You actually have to be super careful here because even though I'm winning, you might think to yourself, well, I'll just do this. And then I get a queen, I have to take it. Then I have to take this. And if you take the rook, you're actually going to get basically beaten here because even though I have the two bishops and a pawn close to queening, you're going to get a queen with check. And wherever you go, basically, I'm going to start causing mayhem. Now, you'd have to be a little careful with your moves here, but at the end of the day, it's a queen, and as long as you can figure out how to stop this pawn, you'll be all right. Thankfully, you don't have to do any of that. After here, you take with the rook, and this is crazy, but when black takes back, you actually just push the pawn forward, and no matter what black does, you end up losing the game. So that was this game, and I'll move on to the next one. this is one of the games I played that lasted the longest and went into a crazy endgame, which probably should have been drawn, but a couple mistakes were made. And we'll work our way through that and get to the critical moments of the game. Pretty early on, I went for this weird queen trade line that basically just says if you take, okay, I'm up maybe in development, and maybe this hole shouldn't be there because you don't have a dark squared bishop. But he didn't take it, so I did another move that's kind of just a play for a tricks move, which is played bishop c5, and if you take the bishop, you drop the rook, and you're going to drop basically the knight too, theoretically. You can actually move the knight back like this if you want to save it, but then I move out, and basically things are fine. Yes, maybe I lose this, but at the end of the day, I'm up some material here. So life goes on. So that didn't happen. He took, and then I get to do my whole knight move, and again, he doesn't have that dark squared bishop. So game goes on. Kind of just some maneuvering here. Here I got really enamored with this very specific construction idea of having basically my pieces like this with the pawn over here on c5. It just looked kind of fortressy to me, and so I really, really liked it just because I was getting a little too fancy and wasn't thinking objectively. Here there's a really crazy sequence. So the best move for me is just the very simple, very obvious, you just got to defend here. Obviously, I'm not really, really worried about anything because there's no tricks where you take here and win the piece or anything like that. Because if you take here, obviously, this is still just equal more or less. But on top of that, obviously, I would just take with this piece and then everything's covered and everything's fine. So that didn't happen. I did this move, which this move just seems crazy. I couldn't justify that, but obviously it opens the attack on the rook, so everything's basically okay, and you get to maneuver your knight from here over to this square, and it's really good. So I didn't do that though. I did this, which is kind of a similar idea, but it's just not as good now because you take here. You're actually supposed to take there, which again is crazy, but and you get into the situation where you're going to be a little careful. You don't obviously want to take this, even though it gives you 3 pieces, because what's going to happen is basically you just move your rook into the action and you're going to pick up the extra pawn, and then with the passed pawn, you're down 2 pawns and the 2 pieces just aren't enough. So I didn't do that. I took here, and then you get in a situation where again white has to make one more correct move. You have to take with the knight, otherwise you're going to lose the knight if you take with the rook. Okay, so now we're in a situation where he's up a pawn, but I have the bishop, which might be helpful in a pretty open position. And here he made a pretty fatal blunder. Taking here is obviously not possible because you're going to get destroyed. But my goal is, I do see this x-ray, basically, that if I can get my bishop over here to h2, give a check to the king, and the king has to move to a space where he can't defend the knight. Maybe I've got some possibilities. So because of that reason, I played this move g5. Now, what he needs to do is just go back. Either he needs to make an advancing move where he can then redirect his knight if he needs to, save it, basically, or he needs to move his knight back here. Basically, the only option that you shouldn't do, which is what he did, which is the third best move, there aren't that many moves, is knight e2. And I'm sure if you look at that for more than a second, you'll find the winning combination, or at least the improving combination. Bishop h2 check, takes, and then I pick up the rook. Game goes on though, it's not nearly over. I'm only up basically 1 pawn of material. We trade some things off. And now I have to be really, really careful because I'm in a position where he's up a pawn right now. And obviously with a knight versus a rook, obviously a lot of chance to be forked here. So you have to be really, really careful here. Both of us made some not ideal moves, but the game basically just shows that I have a small advantage, about the size of a pawn. Game goes on here, there's a lot of maneuvering. Okay, now we're reaching a pretty important part of the game where it's going to come to the end pretty soon. This move is just to protect the pawn. Obviously, you just don't want to drop any material. And I keep moving. Okay, this is a pretty important part where he made a mistake, which is he's supposed to move the piece back, because basically what happens is he takes here, I move the king over, and what he's supposed to do is just move this and basically say, you've got nothing, the knight's defended, this pawn can't move anywhere, this pawn, if it moves anywhere, it's just going to be taken and it's going to fizzle out. But instead, by moving here, it allows me to put my pawn over here block off access to his king, put it on a square where the knight can't reach it and then move, and now I've kind of got the impetus. It's plus 2.6 for the engine. Here's a pretty important check that basically forces the king off of this row. Obviously, he can't go forward. And now you got to be really, really careful. Right now, the engine says about 12 positive in my direction, so it's pretty big. The only problem is you're just going to lose the knight. If you move king e1, obviously, any king move it just allows me to pick up more material. Knight moves like this, that's just not going to work for many reasons, including the fact that I can just do that, obviously, or I can even take here. And worse than all of this move is theoretically one of the better moves, but that's not a move you want to have to play. The reason this move is so good is because you basically stop getting checkmated immediately if it happens. At the end of the day, he blundered. Unfortunately, mate in one. Let me find the actual continuation. Yeah. That's not the continuation. Yes, moved forward. He moved the knight back, and he just missed the fact that it was back range check with the rook. And then I picked up my 4th win.